Hi everybody, my name is Jennifer Feldman, and today I'm going to be explaining and showing you how to make fraction strips. And the cool thing about fraction strips is that fractions can be a little hard to get your brain around. You can start off, okay, numerator, denominator, I add, I subtract, but when it comes to multiplication, when it comes to comparing, it's really good to have a visual representation of that fraction. And one way to do that is to create fraction strips. So the way that I've created my strips is I started off with a single piece of paper, and my paper is just regular computer paper. It's a little bit thicker. You can start off with something that's a little bit thicker. And the way I started off was I folded it in half. Again, half, right? You kind of know a half when you see one, and that's a good place to start when it comes to fractions. So I folded in half. Then I folded in, and I matched the corners. And then, so I match the corners in, and then I would cut on the line. And one thing about making fraction strips is that when you cut or fold, it's important to try and be as exact as possible. Because if you want to go on and compare a fourth and a third, which one's bigger, why, it helps to have started with good clean lines. So there we go. But I actually went a step further, and I did mine the short way, and I created slightly thinner strips. So no matter how you do it, it's fine however you start, but use the same width, use the same strips when you're creating your different fraction strips so that you have the same one when you start. I can't compare a half of this and a half of this because they didn't start the same. So the first fraction we're going to start with these strips is 1/2. And 1/2, you have to think about fractions. It's a good way to think about fractions is sharing between people. So if I took this piece, let's say I have a biscotti, and I wanted to share it with my friend, and I went like this, and I said, okay, here's your half, and here's my half. You'd immediately go, well, that's not fair. You got more than me. That's not fair. That's not sharing. So when we make a half, it's important to have two equal pieces. And fractions are all about equality, equal pieces, equal sharing. So when I do my strip, what I'm going to do is I'm going to match the corners here, and I'm going to fold it in half. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark in the middle the line. Now, here comes writing the fraction. So my numerator and my denominator, the fancy numbers that we all kind of remember when it comes to fractions, what do they mean? So the denominator is the number of equal pieces that I started out with. So in this case, I have 2. So my number in my denominator, the number on the bottom of the fraction, is going to be 2. I have to write these mirror image, so if they look a little silly when I come out with a half, you'll know why. So here we go. It's a little hard to see, so I'll do it this way. Okay, so I have, the numerator hasn't been written in yet though. So what is it? Now, the numerator tells us how many of the equal parts we have. So when we're adding fractions, this is why we don't add the denominator. 1/2 plus 1/2 does not equal 2/4. It equals 2 halves. So, and here's why. Because the numerator is the number that tells you how many of these pieces you have. So in this case, on this side, I have 1, and on this side, I have another 1. So I'm going to put my 1 and my 1 here. All right, so now you can see why we write a half as 1/2. Okay, 1 into 2 equal parts. Okay, so I want you to think about what would we do to divide a strip into fourths? Okay, you can pause your computer, you can think about it for a little bit. Okay, welcome back. Now, the way I like to do fourths is I want to think about 4 equal pieces. So what I do is I take it and I make a half. And this is where we'll get into equivalent fractions. You'll be able to compare a half and a fourth and see which one's bigger. So first of all, I take my half. Now I need 2 more, I need equal pieces. So I fold them in half again. And I like to do the way where I match the corners into the middle. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4. It would be like if I was sharing that same biscotti between 4 people now and making it even. So what I do is I'm going to draw the lines in again. Okay, so I draw my lines in again. And now the denominator is not going to be a half. It's going to be what? It's going to be 4, right? Because I have 1, 2, 3, 4 equal pieces. Now comes the fun part. I get to write the 4 upside down. Or not upside down, mirror imaged. So let's see if I can do that. It's really amazing that when you do something in mirror image, it really gets your brain working in a different way. Okay, so I hope I did all of these right. Okay, so let's see. Yep, 4 equal pieces, and each one of these represents one of the 4 equal pieces. That's why I write in my numerator, I write 1. Okay, so now I have 1/4. And the cool thing that you can do now is now that you have at least 2 fraction strips, is that you can compare them. So immediately I can see something. If I put my half above my 4th, even if I go like this, I can see 1/2 is the same as 2/4. Okay, so in this case, I can see that because they take up the same amount of space, I can overlap them, that they are equivalent. Okay, and so one way to write 1/4 plus 1/4, you write the 2 over the 4, and that's going to be the same as a half. So now we could go on and we could do 8s. We could fold our 4ths in half and get 8s. But one thing I want you to think about is now, how would we make a third? Okay, thirds are a little bit tricky to get even. So I want you to think about that for a second. How might we get a third? 3 equal pieces. All right, so the way that I like to think about thirds is folding a letter. How do you get a letter to fit in an envelope? Well, you take a little bit and you kind of fold it in, leaving a little bit left over, and you can kind of eyeball it, but your ideal thing should be like a little snake. And you snake it back. Now we should have 3 equal pieces. So these are our 1/3, okay? Draw the lines. So there'll be a 3 on the bottom. So thirds, and the ones on the top. Okay. So 1/3. Now, one thing that is cool to notice, so one thing that you'll see when you do these two, is that as my my denominator, goes up, the actual size of the piece is getting smaller. So if you had a problem like, what is bigger, 1/4 or 1/3? You could look at your fraction strips and you could say 1/3 actually takes up more of the strip. There's bigger. It's a bigger amount than 1/4. And this is where fractions are deceptive, right? Because 4 is bigger than 3, right? That doesn't make any sense. But when you see it in a fraction strip, you can be like, okay, actually, because of where the denominator comes from, you can see that 1/3 is bigger than 1/4, and 1/2 is bigger than 1/3. So this is just the beginning of fraction strips, and I challenge you to try and figure out ways to make different numbers. So how could you make a 5th? And using what you already know about fraction strips. So for instance, is a 5th going to be bigger or smaller than a 4th? And how would you know? You think about it, it's going to be smaller because there would be more pieces. How much smaller? Just a little bit, right? So how would I fold this into 5ths? I could do a few different things. I could fold it, well, I can't really fold it into thirds because 5 is not a multiple of 3. And I couldn't fold it in half because 5 is not a multiple of 2. So I'm going to leave you with that challenge, and then when we come back to the next video, we'll see if you figured it out. All right, thanks a lot, guys. Bye.